Alrighty, well, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Dolphiny, and I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library. And it's my pleasure to present our speaker for today, Jean Miller from the Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Hunterdon County. Jean is a Cornell Master Beekeeper and a Rutgers Master Gardener. She's also a retired teacher and has traveled twice to Kenya to study honeybees. As a lifelong naturalist and traveler, she has hiked over 50 United States national parks and has traveled to all the continents except Antarctica. So welcome, Jean. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we jump into our presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the program, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat buttons in the Zoom dashboard. Jean is going to be teaching a beekeeping class, so I'll be uploading a flyer to the chat. So if you're interested and you want to learn more, you might be interested in attending, you can download that from there. It'll also be available in a follow-up email. If you have time, we ask you please complete the survey at the end of the webinar. We always and truly appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And if you want some more information about beekeeping, bee husbandry, anything like that, you can visit the New Jersey Beekeepers Association at njbeekeepers.org. I will send that link out in the chat as well once we get underway. Just one last thing before we jump into the presentation, I just want to do a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device, like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure they're connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you run into any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. And I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And as I mentioned, if you do have any questions, send them our way. You can use the Q&A or the chat button. Either one of those will get it to us and we'll be happy to address them for you. So that is everything that I have for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Jean now.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, so yes, as Andrew said, I'm a master gardener and also a master beekeeper. And us beekeepers, we kind of get a little obsessed with our bees. So thank you for inviting me to learn about what goes on inside the hive. So off we go. First thing I like to talk to people about is whether or not they can tell the difference between a honeybee and other stinging insects. Generally speaking, most people, when they get stung, they automatically assume it's a bee. And most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, it's usually a yellow jacket primarily. Sometimes it's also it could be a hornet or a wasp. But this Venn diagram that I put together, it has the most words of any of my slides, tells you the difference between the two, as well as they do have some commonalities as well. So, for example, honeybees are amber in color. They have amber with blackish stripes. They're not brightly striped. Usually wasps, yellow jackets, hornets, they have a brighter coloring, like bright yellow or bright white stripe. Again, these are general rules. There are exceptions to everything, but in general, your wasp and yellow jackets are more brightly striped. The honeybee, not only being amber or honey colored, is also fuzzy. And there's a reason for them being fuzzy. And that is the same for all bees in general, all other bees that you may encounter. But wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets, they are essentially bald. They're not hairy at all. Both of them do eat carbohydrates in the form of nectar, and that's pretty much the energy that calories that they need as an adult to function. Now, honeybees make honey, hence the name, and that honey is really used as a preserved food that's needed during times when they can't gather nectar, like here in New Jersey, it would be during the wintertime. But yellow jackets, wasps, yellow jackets primarily, but wasps and hornets will steal honey, as well as other honeybees will steal honey from other hives. If you have a weak colony and it can't defend itself well, both the wasp, yellow jackets, hornets, as well as other honeybees from stronger colonies will try to steal honey out of a weak colony, and eventually it could destroy that colony. In the wintertime, your honeybees cluster together about the size of a basketball or a little smaller inside their hive, and they stay warm the entire winter. They vibrate slightly, and they also eat that honey to be able to use their muscles to vibrate and generate heat. They and their queen live the entire winter together as in mass. However, with the other ones, the wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets, those colonies entirely die out except for the queens. The queen wasp, the queen yellow jackets, the queen hornets will go into the leaf litter and hibernate during the winter, but the rest of the entire colony dies out. So if you see those like football shaped, those are bald-faced hornet nests that hang from trees. After a couple hard frosts, there's nothing alive in there. In fact, I've seen people bring them in and use them as like native nature decorations. Now, for all of them, only the females can sting. The males of all these stinging insects that I'm talking about do not sting. They literally do not have a stinger, but only the females can sting. The honeybees can only sting you once, and then she dies. The stinger literally gets ripped out of her. I'll show you a picture of a stinger magnified in one of the future slides, and you can see. However, your yellow jackets, wasps, and hornets, they have a straight stinger, like a little hypodermic needle, and they can sting repeatedly. And the reason for that is that they provide little caterpillars and other insects as their protein portion of the food for their young. So they have to be able to sting things repeatedly. They have to be able to use their stinger many times. All of them have 5 eyes, and in another slide you'll see them. Everyone can probably see the 2 compound eyes on each side of their head, but they actually have 3 little tiny ones in a triangle, kind of like in between them, and we'll see that later. All of them originally had an ancestor that was like a wasp over 100 million years ago. But when the angiosperms or flowering plants developed, then a branch of that ancestor evolved into the bees because they became essentially vegetarians. They used pollen as the protein food to raise their young, whereas the wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets continue to use other little insects like caterpillars and such to feed to their young as protein. So they're the omnivores, where honeybees are essentially vegetarian wasps. This is a cool last item. Your wasps, hornets, yellow jackets, they use items in nature to make their homes. Like you might have heard of mud wasps. They'll use mud, or the big paper footballs, gray footballs that the bald-faced hornets use, or chewed up wood. They'll live in holes in the ground. Some yellow jackets do that. But the honeybees, they basically need just a cavity about the size of a 5-gallon bucket, and they then exude wax from their bodies to build home. It's like, can you imagine having like nails coming out of your ears and sheet rock coming out of your armpits or whatever, and they'd be able to build your own home from something that comes out of your body, which I think is kind of amazing. They're basically little insect engineers, which I love. So one sting and she dies. If any of you are a little queasy, you might want to turn away for a few seconds, because I'm going to show a little video of an actual sting. So if you get stung by a honeybee, you will see the stinger will be left in you. It's about 22 seconds long. I apologize for those who are eating. As a beekeeper, if I get stung, I quickly flick that away, because if you look closely, it's like a little pump that pumps the venom in. But the faster you flick it off, the less venom. So only the females, as I mentioned before, which are called workers, have stingers, as well as the queen. The queen stinger is straight. There's a special reason for that, but all the other female worker bees have these little barbed stingers that get stuck in a person's skin and gets ripped away, and hence they die. So in general, honeybees are really a gentle insect. They don't feel the need to sting unless they are threatened. Like say you accidentally want to step on one that's on like a clover plant, or you have one on your arm, and instead of letting it be and lick the sweat off you swat it. Yes, she'll sting you then. But I can walk right in front of my beehives with bees coming in and out, and they don't bother me. If I walk by a yellow jacket nest in the ground, those yellow jackets might come out and sting me. So honeybees in general are they're quite gentle. Oops, sorry about that. So they do have tongues. The tongue is actually formed by three pieces that come together. There they can lick up honey, sugar, anything sweet. They're soft. They don't hurt you. It's the other end that would bother you. And they do have fuzz, as I mentioned. And that has the purpose of, probably all of you are not saying, pollen, collecting pollen. Exactly. The pollen, they're so fuzzy, they even have it on their eyeballs. And you'll see it in a better slide later. They can, the pollen will stick to them automatically when they fly. There's a little physics involved. Scientists believe that the electrons in their fuzz fly off while they're flying through the air, getting positively charged. When they go into a flower, the pollen might be slightly negatively charged. So there's a little electrostatic, plus just touching the pollen, which could be hooked or whatever, will gather it. And they will take that back to the colony. So they do go through a complete metamorphosis as an insect. Some don't, but these do. They have 4 stages. First are the eggs, and the eggs here are very tiny. I'm going to use my cursor here. You can look in there, in the bottom of these cells, you see little teeny, looks like grains of white rice. Those are eggs. If you're a beekeeper, in my opinion, there's 2 things you need to be able to do. See eggs, and I need a flashlight and reading glasses to do that, and also mitigate a pest. A pest is called a varroa mite, which I'll mention briefly later. If you see eggs, you know you have a queen in there. You have to have a queen for that colony to survive, because she is the only one laying eggs under normal circumstances. And queens are sometimes hard to find. If you have 50,000 bees in your colony, she might be running around, but eggs don't go anywhere. They stay in the cell once they're laid, and they stay in eggs for only 3 days. After 3 days, they hatch. So if you see eggs, more than likely you have a healthy queen in there laying. After 3 days, they hatch into a larvae. And here are some larvae here. They look like little pearly white sea crescents. These are very young larvae, and they're sitting in a pool of food that's called royal jelly that I'll talk about later. They're essentially the caterpillar phase, but they don't move around. Bees go to them and feed them as they grow very rapidly. They're eggs for 3 days, then they're a larvae for about 6 days. And after 6 days, the bees then, they fill up that little individual honeycomb cell, and the bees that are taking care of them will cover it up. It's called a capping. That's made out of wax and a little bit of propolis. Propolis I'll discuss later. And in about 9 days, underneath that cap, they pupate into something that is first the same white color, but now it's shaped like a bee. And then it darkens to a more natural color adult bee. Here you can see the 5 eyes now. You got your 2 on the outside, the compound eyes, and these 3 right in the middle. They're called ocelli or simple eyes. Scientists think they could be used for 2 things, either navigation or to detect light versus dark, knowing night versus day. But we're not exactly sure. So they're an egg, a larvae, a pupa. And then in 21 days, if it's going to be a female worker, which the bulk of the bees are, she will eat her way out. She'll eat the capping and pop out. And here you can see her eyeballs. See the fuzz even on her eyeballs? The only thing that really doesn't have any fuzz are the antennae. So they're adorable when they're just born. They're very blonde, very fuzzy, a little bit smaller looking. It's just because they're not puffed up yet. And the first thing they do is clean out their cell. Wouldn't it be great if kids were born that way? They just know to clean their room. So the very first job they do is they turn around and clean out their cell that they emerged from, so that it's ready for the queen to lay another egg in. It gets reused. So as I mentioned earlier, the larvae kind of sits in a little pool of, it almost looks like skim milk, but it's called royal jelly. All larvae for the first 3 days are fed royal jelly. You're going, what's this royal jelly from? The bees that are tending the larvae, or sometimes you'll hear me say brood. Brood is basically any non-adult bee, in this case, the larvae. The nurse bees are the ones that are eating some of the pollen that's brought in, because they need that protein to make royal jelly in their bodies. And then it comes out of two sets of glands in their head, the mandibular glands and the hypopharyngeal glands. So when a nurse bee looks like she's looking down into the cell, she's actually, for a young larvae, she's actually pumping out this royal jelly from her head. Like imagine yogurt coming out of your ears. and in fact, it tastes a little bit like plain unsweetened yogurt, but not quite as strong. And all those little larvae get this superfood. It's like a bee superfood that has a lot of nutrients in it compared to just plain old nectar. They get that for the first 3 days. Then they get switched over to basic bee food, which is honey and bee bread. And bee bread is basically pollen and honey mixed together. The only exception to that is the queen. If they're developing new queens, those developing queens will get royal jelly their entire life through development and beyond. So that is what makes a queen a queen. People say, how does a queen become a queen? It's her diet. She has a diet of royal jelly. All other bees get royal jelly for the first 3 days of their larval life. Queens get it their entire life. And they need that. They need that to change into a different type of, a different morphology. It's a larger female bee. These worker bees, they're all female because, and the females come from fertilized eggs. But the queens got this royal jelly that enlarges her ovaries, gives her a straight stinger. It really just changes her anatomy entirely. So let's talk a little more about the worker bees. And the worker bees are all females. And they're called worker bees because they do all the chores in the hive. They do everything. The males, sorry guys, do nothing except for one thing. And you probably can figure that out. And we'll talk about them later. The worker bees during the warm weather months, so here in New Jersey, that would be like March, April into October, they'll live anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. They literally work themselves to death. You can tell when a worker bee's getting old because her wings getting all tattered. The first half of her life, she stays in the hive and does house chores. There's a variety of jobs that she does in the hive, and they're usually, but not always, delegated by her age. Her jobs change as she matures. And then the second half of her life, the last 3 to 4 weeks, she becomes a forager and goes out and gathers either nectar or pollen or water or some plant resins that makes this thing called propolis, which I'll mention again later. In the wintertime, at least in New Jersey, they're not out foraging. So the bees here will live 2 to 3 months, the worker bees. So after cleaning out their cell, being born, cleaning out their cell, the very first job that most house bees or worker bees have is they become nurse bees. They take care of their little sisters. There are a few little brothers called drones, but it's mostly females. So they feed the larvae, they vibrate their wing muscles to keep them warm when it's chilly out, not like here now, it's quite hot here now. But they will also fan them when it's hot because the larvae have to develop in a certain temperature range. It's in the 90s, it's like mid 90s. If too cold, they won't develop right. Too hot, they won't develop right. So that's the nurse bee's chores is to, and also if there are any sick baby bees, they will remove them from the colony and get rid of them. That's the first main job that a bee has is a nurse bee. They will also become receiver bees when foragers come back with nectar. That forager that has nectar, the nectar they pull into their body, and it basically have a honey crop in their body, which is like a grocery bag that just stores that nectar. That bee goes into the colony and through trophallaxis, which is like a mouth-to-mouth transfer, she will transfer the nectar to a receiver bee, which is another house bee chore. And she will then maybe transfer to another one who transfers her to another one. And there's a lot of enzymes that are added to the nectar. And then finally, they are added to a honeycomb to hold the nectar, which is then fanned. They'll fan the nectar to evaporate a lot of the water because most nectar, it varies in water in it, but most nectar is around 80, that's 80% water. And they have to evaporate it down to about 15 to 18% water to thicken it up. So you have this fanning of the nectar, the enzymes are added. In fact, honey has natural hydrogen peroxide in. So that's why it's antimicrobial, and we'll learn about a little more of that later. But once that moisture content is reached, once it's perfect, like between 15 and 18%, then they will cap the honey. And you can see up in the top left here, there's some capped honey. Then it's ready to last forever for them to eat in the wintertime, or the extra we as beekeepers take off and extract. A couple more house chores that they do is the first job I mentioned was they clean out their own cell. And also, as a relatively young bee, look up on the upper left here, you'll see the abdomen, the underside of the abdomen of a bee. You see these two white dots? Those are flakes of wax. They have four wax glands on either side of the underside of their abdomen, and they can create the wax from their body. And then they use their mandibles to form it into beautiful hexagonal tubes, honeycomb. They also remove dead workers from the hive. Anything that gets into the hive that shouldn't be there. Say I open up a colony, open up a hive body, and some leaves fall in, and I don't remove them. They'll pull out the leaves. They are very fastidious. They don't want anything that shouldn't be in there. Very clean. They vibrate their wing muscles to keep the hive warm, and especially the brood, the young babies in the cooler months. And they pack away the food, as I mentioned, both the nectar and pollen. In the summertime, they'll go to the entrance of their colony and fan their wings to kind of pull in the air. They're basically their own HVAC system as well, which is really cool. This here is a cross section of the honeycomb. It has a central wall made of made of wax, beeswax, and then about 13-degree angle tubes, hexagonal tubes, angle up to either hold honey or brood, whatever they need to do. There's a guard bee in the lower right, kind of has a little bit of a karate pose. Guard bees, there are really only a few guard bees per colony. So that's why we use smokers to just gently, when we go into, beekeepers use smokers, gently go into a colony. We smoke the entrance just to distract them, just to turn them around. And when they're distracted, then you're distracting the guard bees and you can open things up and not really have a problem. The bees in the bottom left are putting their abdomens up in the air, and that's a scenting pheromone that they're releasing to let other bees know this is where our colony's at, this is where our queen's at. I see this often if I catch a swarm and I put it into a new empty hive body box. If the queen is in there, some of the bees will come out and scent, saying, okay, just telling the rest of them that I might not have captured all the bees to come down here because our queen's here. This is our new home. As that's a karate picture of the guard bee. A couple other things we do here. So we have queen attendants. There's a queen in the middle here. She has a number 40 sticker on her. They're not born that way. A lot of times queen rearers, that are actually people that create queens to sell to other beekeepers, they will number them. I mark mine sometimes with a little bit of paint just to see her better. So how is this queen made, and why would you need a queen? There are many reasons. One of the main reasons is here in New Jersey, in the months of like April and May, this is swarm season. If a colony comes out of the winter and it's strong and robust, and they have a nice nectar flow of spring flowers coming in, that colony, think of it like a super organism. It wants to split into two. So the old queen will leave with a little more than half the workers. We'll talk about that later. And then new queens need to be developed. And the bees always develop not just one queen, because if you put all your eggs in one basket and she doesn't develop properly, then your colony's queenless and it eventually can die out. So they usually develop many queens at once. So another reason a queen could die is the colony could kill her. When she gets older, she doesn't pump out as much eggs, and she goes through like what I call bee menopause, and they will kill her because you need a fertile young queen to keep that colony living. Again, she's the only one that can lay fertilized eggs, which turns into workers that keeps the colony going. As a beekeeper, you can accidentally kill a queen. That's, you just didn't see it, you squished them. That's rare, but it can happen. Queen can get disease. There are a variety of reasons why a colony would want to make a new queen. So what they do is they look for very young larvae. Remember, the queen larvae have to be given royal jelly their entire life, and all larvae get it for 3 days. So they have to choose a few very young larvae. They can't choose larvae that have been switched over to honey and bee bread already. So they choose several and continue feeding it that royal jelly. And that makes a large cell. It looks like a peanut hanging off of the honeycomb, as opposed to, like, down here, you can see a little bit of a capped cell here. There's a regular bee developing under there. This is a queen cell right here. Interestingly, the female worker bees take 21 days to mature from egg to hatching. The male drones, which are a little bigger, take 24 days, but the queen bees only take 16 days. Even though they're the biggest bee, they take 16 days to develop. Again, they're fed that super royal jelly food the whole time as larvae. Now, this is the reason why queens have straight stingers, because in a colony, typically there's only one queen. There may be times where you have multiple queens for a short couple weeks, maybe at most, but generally speaking, there's one queen in a colony. The first one that comes out does what's called, there are different names for it. I've heard piping, I've heard quacking, I've heard tooting. Again, this is all in the dark. There's no light. She comes out and this queen starts to make this sound, and it's very distinct to a beekeeper. It doesn't sound like buzzing. When a beekeeper hears it, they're like, what is this? You don't hear it often because you have to be lucky to be opening up, looking at your colony right when a virgin queen has come out. I've heard it twice, this year and a couple years ago. And they start to pipe or quack. They don't have vocal cords like we do, but they flex their thorax muscles. And the other queens that are still in their cells that haven't come out yet start to pipe back at them, at the first one that came out. So she listens, and she doesn't have ears, but she can feel the vibrations, and goes and seeks out the other queens that are still in their cells and kills them with her straight stinger. So there could be up to a dozen or more, and she's going around looking for the other ones. Boom. And that's why she has a straight stinger. Not to sting people, but to sting other queens that are still developing, her rivals. It's pretty tough out there. So and sometimes two will come out at the same time, or relatively the same time, and they will have a fight, and whoever stings the other one to death, well, she's the winner. After a few days, she usually hangs around in the colony for a few days, getting used to it. She might even take a couple, what's like an orientation flight, which means she comes out kind of, and all bees do this. They circle in front of their colony, looking at landmarks to kind of home in, get their GPS to where home is. But then after maybe a week or so, she goes on a mating flight. Usually one day, sometimes two. It's usually a nice sunny day. And mating takes place in the air. And she wants to mate. Well, we as beekeepers want her to mate with many drones. This is my X-rated picture here. This is a drone on the back. She flies through the air, and the drones are usually in a cloud of a whole bunch together. Think of it like a bee bar. The drones are just waiting for virgin queens, because once the queens hatch, they're virgins. They have eggs, but they're all unfertilized eggs, and they need to be fertilized to make female worker bees. Unfertilized eggs become drones. So if she just started laying without being fertilized, she would just be making drones, and the colony would die out because drones don't do anything except they want to mate. So as she flies along, virgin queens have an extremely powerful pheromone that the drones will, which have the biggest eyes of all the bees, not only see her, but they will smell the pheromone and go after her. So basically the first one to her gets to mate with her on the fly. The male's reproductive organs are normally inside him, but when he mates with her, they kind of pop out into her, and he kind of falls back off of her and dies. He has no stinger. Remember the worker bees, if they sting you, they die. If a male gets lucky enough, well, it depends on your perspective, lucky enough to mate, that kills them. So here's a little bee humor here in regard to that. So the queen bee has a mating flight. She takes on dozens of partners whose genitals audibly explode inside her, killing them. So a lot of them die with smiles on their face, but maybe one guy might not think it was that great. So back to this, and we as beekeepers want her to mate with as many drones as she can. The reason is, and she doesn't keep the sperm of every. She only keeps a little bit of sperm of every drone in her, and she uses that for the rest of her life. She doesn't go out for a refill later. That's it. And we as beekeepers want genetic diversity in our hive, because say she mated with one drone and he is susceptible to a certain bee disease, and there are many bee diseases. There are probably 20 viruses, there are fungal diseases, all sorts of stuff. If she mates with one drone, then all her offspring might be susceptible to that disease if he is susceptible to it. So if she has many, many different genetic fathers, the sperm in her, the babies will have a lot of genetic fathers, and you'll have a healthier hive. So when she returns, takes her a couple days to kind of learn how to lay eggs in a way, because they're a little not quite great at first as mothers, but then they start pumping them out. She can lay up to 1,500 eggs a day. She doesn't do that every day. That's usually in New Jersey. That's usually she starts cranking them up in February and March, because she wants to have her peak population in May, June, when we have our major nectar flow. So now here in July, she's still laying eggs, but it's probably not at her peak. And in the wintertime, she might actually stop for a week or so. But the bees take great care of her. The queen's attendants, which is a circle of bees around her here, her retinue, it has many different names. They feed her, they make sure she's the right temperature, they carry away her waste. Bees do not go to the bathroom in the hive except for her. They groom her, they make her as happy as she can. As long as she's pumping out the eggs, she's golden. But once she doesn't, then they will kill her. And generally speaking, queens live 2 to 5 years, maybe an average 3. It just depends where you're at, but 2 to 5 years, which is really long, considering that her daughters will live 6 to 8 weeks in the summer and only a couple months in the winter. The drones, they can live a few months unless they mate. That kills them. This is looking at a queen cell, a developing queen cell. You're looking up from the bottom into it, and you can see the larvae swimming in that pool of royal jelly that she gets her entire life. And I had a chemist in one of my talks a while ago saying, "What's in royal jelly?" It's like, I didn't know. I love questions when I don't know the answer, because then I have to find out. And in case you're interested, that's what royal jelly is comprised of. Mostly water, but you got some proteins and amino acids and trace minerals and vitamins. So here's a queen hatching. She hatches head first down. And when we as beekeepers see queens hatching in New Jersey, again, this is different for different areas, between April and June, it usually means one thing to a New Jersey beekeeper, and that is swarms. I love swarms. Well, I try to mitigate them. I really don't want them. I'd rather keep all my bees together, but it's fun to catch a swarm. The bees are usually very gentle. They're filled up with honey, because they're looking for a new home and they need that honey resource to start creating wax once they get to a new home. But when you see a swarm clustered on a branch, and here you can see me petting one, it's like petting a cat. It's warm, it's fuzzy, it's vibrating. Again, not going to hurt me. It's a bivouac. It's a temporary home. They're there temporarily, anywhere from a few hours to a few days. And then there are scout bees that go out. Well, the old queen leaves with actually more than half of her workers, and the new queen stays. The new queen may have hatched, she may have not hatched. It just depends on the situation. A lot is weather dependent as well. So over half the bees leave with the old queen, and the rest stay in the hive with the new one. As I mentioned, they fill up with honey beforehand, and their scouts are looking for a new home. They're looking for a cavity. I can put out what's called swarm traps to try to encourage them to go into a trap. I won't have to catch them. They're looking for maybe a cavity in a hollowed out tree, hopefully not between someone's walls or in someone's soffit. But this is the great time for, if you see one swarm, to go onto your, in this case for New Jersey, New Jersey Beekeepers website, or if you're in another state, they have I'm sure have a beekeeping website, and there's usually a swarm collector page where you can have beekeepers come out and collect it. The only thing is, by the time the beekeeper comes out, the swarm might have found a new home and gone away. So just keep that in mind. They can only stay in this bivouac stage for a few hours to a few days. Now that talks about pretty much all the indoor chores that bees do. But once they graduate to outside chores, then they're pretty much collecting items for the colony. And in this case, if you look closely, you will see a few bees here collecting pollen. Pollen microscopically comes in different shapes and sizes. This is a sunflower pollen. This is called, I believe, this is an anise hyssop pollen. But all these bees are collecting pollen, and pollen, can come in all different colors. In fact, the pollen here is from a Caryopteris plant that blooms later in the year, more like August, and it's almost like a blue-black pollen. As a beekeeper, if I look at a frame full of pollen, and usually these frames full of pollen are near the brood so that nurse bees can go over and eat it, if I see lots of different colors in it, I'm happy, because that means you're getting pollen from different flower sources, and not all pollen is created equally. Some have more nutritional elements in certain areas, some more nutritional elements in another area. Think of like you should be eating lots of fruits and vegetables, that type of thing, a varied diet. That's what we're doing here with when we see lots of different pollens. It's good. So here, they're not collecting pollen, but they have collected nectar. Nectar here that is uncapped. It's not honey yet. Enzymes have been added. They're fanning it. And when it gets just to the right amount of moisture level, then it gets capped, like over on the left side. And that is the preserved food that bees then eat during the winter time. And we take the extra as honey, we as beekeepers. So if bees find a great source of nectar, or it could even be water, because bees bring back water to the hive, not just to drink, but they also spread it around the hive in these hot days and fan its like evaporative cooling effect. But if they find something that they need to convey to their sisters, they do a little dance on the frame of the honeycomb. Again, this is in total darkness. So the bees are sensing the vibration of the dance, and they're also sensing, if it's flowers, maybe the smell, the aroma of the flower. And they do what's called a waggle dance, which is basically a figure eight, but that centerpiece, they waggle back and forth. So if they start waggling straight up the frame, and then they come back down and waggle straight up the frame again and come back down, then that tells their sisters, go out and go directly towards the sun. This picture here shows they're going, say, on an angle from the sun. So it tells her sisters, okay, go out, don't go straight towards the sun, but go to this angle away from the sun, and then you'll find these, in this case, these pretty pink flowers. If they dance straight down, that means go out and go directly away from the sun to this source, and you'll find it. So it tells the bees which direction to go. The length of the waggle will tell them how far to go. If it's a very short waggle, that means it's close by. If it's a longer waggle, that means it's farther away. If they're going very fast, it can also, we think, tell the amount. If they're extremely frenetic, then it could be a big amount of whatever they're trying to locate. They're trying to tell their sisters to go find. So we can't not talk about the drones, because they do have one very important function, and that is to spread the genetic material from a colony to other virgin queens. So here's a picture of a drone. Can't sting. They do buzz louder. They're louder than the female workers, and they have very large eyes compared to all the other bees. In fact, queens have the smallest eyes. So they have one job and one job only, and that's to mate with the queen. And their sisters really do take good care of them, because they do during the warm weather months, because they are the genetic material that can go into future colonies. So They feed them. When the drones go out and hover around in these drone congregation areas, they do that for about half an hour. Then they come back home and their sisters feed them. Then they go back out again. They hover. It takes a while. They're just hovering and they come back home unless they find a queen. So they don't do any hive work at all. They are the biggest of the honeybees, excluding the queen. So if you look on this picture, there is a queen here facing down. She's marked yellow. All of these are worker bees except for the gentleman right here. Here's a drone. A little bit boxier, a little larger than the workers. There are not many in a colony. Up to only 10% of a colony might be drones, and that's probably at its max. In the wintertime in New Jersey, it goes down to 0%. And we'll talk about that later. So some people say, well, how do you get bees if you want to become a beekeeper? There are a couple ways. I'm just showing you one way here. You can buy what's called a package of bees. On the East Coast here, there's a lot of package propagation down in Georgia. These bees came up from Georgia. You can order them online. You can obtain them from another beekeeper. You can buy what's called a nucleus hive. And a nucleus hive is like a 1/4 size hive. It has 5 frames of bees and a queen in. Packages are just like a shoebox full of bees with a queen in. And it's like buying a toddler is like a package versus buying a teenager. The packaged bees are going to take a little longer because they have to create the beeswax, where a nucleus hive already has some beeswax, but they're more expensive. So there are pros and cons to both. I used to help a fellow with distributing packages of bees. He doesn't do it anymore. And like just in a weekend of 505 packages, that's over 5 million honeybees. It's very warm in the back of his trailer. That's why the packages are spaced apart. If not, they would generate, the bees generate a lot of heat. Parts of the hive. Okay. We call these boxes that you see stacked up and down, we call them supers. So I'll try to use the word boxes, but beekeepers call them supers. Usually the bottom first, sometimes second box are the deepest ones. So they're called deep supers or deep boxes. And that's where the nursery is. That's where the brood, the queen, the nurse bees, there is some honey and pollen there too. In general, in New Jersey, most beekeepers keep their brood in 2. This one's only showing 1, but 2 deep brood boxes. I personally use all mediums just because it's the same size for everything. And the medium is the second type of box I'm going to talk about. In this area, it's the pink, purple, and yellow. And that's where the extra honey is stored. And that's usually the honey that the beekeeper takes. Bees don't know when to stop making honey. In New Jersey, they need 60 pounds to get them through the winter. They won't stop at making 60 pounds if there's nectar out there. It's like they're up 60 pounds, we don't need any more. Nope, if there's still nectar out there, they'll keep bringing it in and bringing it in and bringing it in. So that's what the beekeepers do. We take the extra honey off the hive. I actually extract 3 times a season. Then there's a bottom board that all of them rest on, and that's where the entrance is. It's actually on the other side. You can't see it. It's just a slim entrance where the bees go in and out. You can also have a top entrance. And then there's an inner cover and an outer wooden cover. You can see a little bit over here. And that's just to protect the colony from the elements. The beekeeper themselves, they wear a hat and veil, usually. I know some people that don't. I know some guys that don't, that are bald. And they have a hive tool, which is right down here. You'll see it closer later, and a smoker. The smoker is to distract the bees. I do not wear dark colors because bees don't like dark colors. It might make them think of a bear, which would go into a colony and destroy it. I don't wear gloves. I don't like to squish bees. Squish bees are angry bees. So I go gloveless like this beekeeper. Looking inside the top of a box, all these are newer frames here. These are older frames. They're not bad. They look dirty. They've just been used. And this is the hive tool. It's like a little teeny crowbar. And when that is the only thing you really need. You usually have 10 frames in a hive, in a box or super. And you use this metal, you need this metal hive tool to pry out the frames. You could not open up your colony or get the frames out without the hive tool. If I only had one thing, it wouldn't be a smoker, it wouldn't be a veil, it would be a hive tool because you couldn't beekeep without it. So this here is a typical frame of brood with resources. The brood is in the middle, this light brown capping or cap brood. If you look very close, you might see some of the white pearly uncapped larvae. There's a little bit of nectar around here. There's a little pollen back down here, and this is honey. So this, if you pull this up as a beekeeper, you have to know, okay, I see brood and honey. This is part of the brood nest. Can you see the queen here? If you look down here, here she is. She's beautiful. She's marked. She didn't come out marked like this, but look how long she is. That is a gorgeous queen on some nice, freshly made honeycomb, nice and white. This here is something on Monday I'll be pulling a lot of. This is a frame of honey. And honey comes in different colors and tastes because of the flowers. All these are my honeys. This happened to be in 2021. My spring honey is on the left, my summer honey in the middle, my fall honey in the right. Same bees, same location. It's just we have different flowers that flower in the spring, summer, and fall that change the color and the flavor of the honey. And you can have varietal honeys of just a certain type of floral nectar. Those usually come from pollinators who take their beehives to, say, maybe a citrus grove that has acres of citrus around. So they have citrus honey or blueberry honey or something like that. Mine is what's called wildflower honey. It's basically whatever about 3 miles from my house. That's pretty much how far bees go. How people ask me how I take the honey out, and I'm going to move this, I'm going to go a little faster here because I'm running out of time. I basically use this hive tool to scrape the cappings off of my frames of honey. I put them into an extractor. It spins very rapidly. The honey goes out to the inside diameter of the extractor, which is stainless steel, dribbles down to the bottom and comes out of a spout on the bottom into a bucket that has a light filter on it. So our two most common products that we have are honey and beeswax. And these are what people use honey and beeswax for. If I have for example, sweetener, it is shown to be a good cough suppressant and a wound and burn care. If I have a question mark, like buying allergies, there's some anecdotal evidence that it can help allergies depending what you're allergic to. If you're allergic to a flower that bees go to, yes. If you're allergic to a flower that bees don't go to, like a wind-pollinated plant, like a ragweed, no. Beeswax used in all sorts of things, but there are other things that come out of the hive. Pollen, you can buy it as instead of a meat protein supplement, a vegetarian supplement. Also, possibly treating allergies, possibly. And of course, very important, pollination services. 1/3 of what you eat, honeybee is helped. Propolises are the plant resins that they use to mix with wax to seal up cracks and all sorts of things in their colony. It's antimicrobial in Asia. It's used in medical and dental care. Also in Asia, the royal jelly that I talked about that the queens are in is used for nutritional supplements, anti-aging cosmetics. Again, not here. It hasn't been approved here in the US, but it's used in other areas. Now, this has been approved. This is a venom trap here. It's slightly electric charged so that when a bee goes over it, she drops a little drop of venom. It doesn't kill her, and it goes into a glass underneath, dries off. You get little flakes of venom that is used to treat people who are truly allergic to bees, which is only about 2 to 5% of the population. When you get stung and on your arm blows up, that's a reaction. Doesn't matter how big it gets blown up. If you get stung in your arm, but then you have swelling of the neck or hives, that's an allergy. That can be dangerous. And of course, beer can be fermented. Excuse me. Honey can be fermented, mixed with water and yeast and made into mead. A very old drink. So what do we do in winter? The queen and her workers cluster during the winter to stay warm. When it gets cold, any drones that didn't get mated, they get evicted. The females, there's so many females, they basically barricade them out and they die freezing and hunger. So 2 ways to go, guys. Either you mate or you live a little longer and die from cold and hunger. They cluster to stay warm. The queen may stop laying eggs slightly and they don't go to the bathroom. They will hold it in to a slightly warm day in the winter, like 45 degrees days. They'll come out what's called a cleansing flight, except for the queen. She can go to the bathroom, they'll clean her up, and then they go right back in. It's kind of fun to watch. We do our major pest is a varroa mite. Think of it like a deer tick for bees, only much larger proportionally. It's a vector for all sorts of diseases, like the one on top is deformed wing virus. We as beekeepers have to monitor our varroa mites. They're in all colonies. We have to try to suppress it. Otherwise, our bees die. So what can you do to help? You should be able to plant pollen and nectar gardens, that plants that bloom in spring, summer, and fall. Don't just think summer, think of fall like goldenrod, or spring like maple trees. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way. Um, Again, that's planting succession. Try not to pollute, limit use of pesticides, especially powdered pesticides. Bees see powder, they think it's pollen. Bees will take in sawdust into their colony. They'll take in corn dust from bird feeders. If you have a powdered pesticide out there, they'll take that in thinking it's pollen. Not good. So let your weeds bloom, let your dandelions, clover. The weeds are a great food. So these are fun things you can do. You can have a bee beard. Something's on my bucket list to have a bee beard. Right now, I usually go into the booth at our county fairs and show people how gentle bees are. So cute as a puppy, we think they are. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jean.
You're welcome.
If anybody has questions, please feel free to send them our way, and we'll be happy to address them. We've had a few come in. Um, you kind of address this, but maybe talk about it a little bit more. But could you explain why hyper-local honeys, for example, honeys in Bermuda, whose area is approximately 21 square miles, have quite different flavors, colors, and viscosities?
Yes, it's all due to the floral down there. I mean, I've had honey from Australia, Africa, Costa Rica, and it's just the different types of flowers. The nectar affects the color as well as the flavor. The viscosity, if it's real, I've also had some honey from Baja California, very dry area, and that was I should have taken my refractometer out and measured the moisture of it. It was thicker, but I didn't. So it probably has to do a lot to do with if to come from a dry area, it might be a little thicker. Um, and so that's pretty much it. It's mainly the floral of the area affects the color and the flavor. I see. How do beekeepers know how much money they can take while leaving enough for bees? It depends on you. It's all local. I can't speak for beekeepers in California or Arizona or whatever, but in New Jersey, you need to keep them 60 pounds. And basically, we can tell, and experienced beekeepers can tell, I go behind my colony and just lift it up a little. If I can't budget, it's heavy enough. They have enough honey. So yeah, you don't want to starve your bees, especially going into winter. Even now, I'm going to be extracting some honey on Monday. I'm going to make sure that they have at least 20 pounds to get through August. Sometimes we have a dearth until the goldenrod flow comes on. So I saw that question. I answered that for you,
Yeah.
Andrew.
Um, how or based on what criteria do the worker bees select a queen?
Um, they will. They they don't select a queen. They decide if they need a new queen. If say if the colony is swarmed, they need to have a new queen made. If they kill their existing queen because she was older and losing less, not producing as much eggs, or she's sick, then they choose some very young larvae and continue feeding them royal jelly, several of them, not just one. So it's basically they choose very young larvae to continue feeding this royal jelly to once they know they need to make a new queen. And they'll make several because they don't put all their eggs in one basket in case, because sometimes queens don't develop properly, just like bees sometimes develop properly. Anything. So that it's basically the age of the larvae, then they select them to develop into queens if they feel they need a queen.
Related to that, um, how do worker bees kill a queen or a sick bee?
Excellent question. These are all great questions. It's called balling. They jump on top of them and vibrate. even like you might have seen on the internet, hornets. If a hornet gets into a colony, they will, they don't really sting them. They literally like dogpile on them and start vibrating like they're trying to create heat and generate so much heat that it kills them. So that's how they kill an old queen that they don't want. That's how they kill a hornet. Um, if there's just a larvae that's sick, they can detect maybe has a lot of varroa mite in it. They will just open up that cell and pull out the larvae and just take it out of the anything they kill in the colony. They take out and dispose of because you don't want to leave anything dead in there.
Any concerns with pyrethroids that are used for mosquito tick control in residential settings?
Um, as a beekeeper, what we do, we register what we should do. I can't say talk for all beekeepers, but as a beekeeper in New Jersey, we register our apiaries with the state so that if there are any pesticides that are going to be sprayed for, say, mosquitoes or whatever, we usually get notified by the state, you know, that so and so is going to your street or this street's going to be sprayed. Then we as beekeepers, what we can do is we can go out and close off our hive for a day or two. You can put a wet sheet over it. You can actually close the entrance just until like a day. It's not going to kill the hive. Usually, unless it's severely hot, then that's a problem. But usually we can protect our colonies if we're told ahead of time that this is going to happen. And we're fortunate in New Jersey that if you register your apiary, you do get those notifications.
My friend in West Virginia discovered one day that his hive was gone. Any idea where they might have taken off to, and what could he do to prevent a hive from leaving in the future?
Oh, that's called absconding. Many things could have happened. I had a colony abscond when I was a new beekeeper. I had it was in August, and it was during a dearth, and I had a weak colony, and I had yellow jackets coming in, just robbing it out. And I didn't. There are precautions you can take to having when you see robbing started. I didn't do it. I didn't do any of them because I didn't know. And usually, literally a day or two, the whole colony just left. So when a colony absconds, it's usually because they're under severe stress at whatever their location is. It could be from yellow jackets. It could be from anything. It could be from disease. It can be from mites. So that particular colony didn't feel good where it was for some reason and absconded. But I couldn't tell them exactly what it is because it could be one of many things.
Do you ever hold presentations at libraries?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I do. And that's when, if it's during the summertime, that's when I bring an observation hive and you can get to see the bees and all that. Yeah, oh yeah, I do mainly in Hunter County because I'm a Hunter County Master Gardener. But as long as it's not too far away, I do them in other libraries. I've been to Mercer County, places like that.
How can you help protect bees against wasps and other predators?
Very good question. Um, in fact, I did have a colony that was being robbed out about a month ago, and I had to take precautions to that. You can do a couple things. Instead of the entrance being totally open along the bottom, which it often is, you can put what's called an entry introducer on it, which makes the entrance much smaller so that the bees inside don't have to protect this whole opening. They need to just protect that small area. And usually they can, they're better at that. If that doesn't work, and I had to do this with mine, I had to put a wet sheet over it for a day because the robbers were coming in. They were trying to get in any cracks. Any cracks I had, I wanted to tape up, but they just wouldn't let them go. So I covered it with a wet, light colored sheet so that those robbers, oh, we can't get in anymore. Let's go look for stuff somewhere else. And after a day, I took it off. I had my introducer on, and that stopped the robbing. There's also a thing called robbing cages. You can make your own as your beekeeper. You can make your own. You can look them up online. It's something I put on my bees hives after I extract in next week. Basically the bees that come out of the hive have to go up and over this contraption. And when they come back, they go up and over. Robbers don't know that. Robbers will want to just dive bomb in. So there are things you can do as a beekeeper.
Do the worker bees train or assign work to new bees, or is it just instinctive?
It's instinctive and it's usually based on their age, their jobs. They graduate from certain jobs to other jobs as they age. If a colony for some reason loses a lot of foragers, which is an older bee job, then maybe some of the younger ones might graduate to it sooner. If they lose a lot of nurse bees, in a way, they could lose a lot of nurse bees. In the springtime, I make splits. I take a colony and split it into two. So I might add some nurse bees from the existing colony into a new colony. So the old colony has a little less nurse bees. Then some of those foragers might revert back. So it's based on the needs of the colony, but mostly due to the age of the bees. It's mostly instinctive, but colony needs do play into it a bit. These are great questions, Andrew.
What can we do to create healthy bee populations if we're not a beekeeper or just
Okay, good question. Well, some of those last things, plant things that you have, and think of trees as well as just flowers, like maple trees. They have lots of they flower in the late winter when it's colonies are just kind of getting active. Plant things in your yard that you have successions of flowers from, say, late January, February. I'm talking New Jersey now, into October. Uh, Beekeepers, we as beekeepers, bees are not native to the Americas. We have 400 native bees in New Jersey. Those are the ones I'm more concerned about, because as beekeepers, we can take care of bees, we can propagate them, we can try to keep our mite levels down. But as non-beekeepers, plant for flowering late winter through fall. It doesn't just help honeybees, which are not native. They've been here for about 400 years, but they're not native. But it also helps all the 400 native bees that we have in New Jersey, our bumblebees, our carpenter bees, our sweat bees, our leafcutter bees. That's another presentation I have just on native bees. They're the ones I'm more concerned about, because they don't have keepers to take care of them like honeybees do. And be careful with the pesticide use.
give it a couple more minutes to see if anything else comes in. But anything you would like to close with?
Well, two things. The New Jersey Beekeeper website that you have on, that is being updated for any people who are going to look at it. It looks kind of old and elementary. It's going to be revamped very soon. But the information will look a little nicer in a few weeks, hopefully. And if anyone is interested in becoming a beekeeper, yes, Andrew is going to be putting out a link to. I'm going to be teaching it in one in September. I'm not the only one that does that. I do that for my local bee club. I don't make any money off of it. It goes straight to the bee club to educate people. Yes, I do sell honey out of my home, but I don't sell it out of store. And there are lots of beekeepers around that sell honey. You probably have beekeepers nearby you don't even know about. I have two others just within a mile, and I'm in Hunterdon County, which is kind of spread out. But I appreciate the time to talk to you, and I hope you enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jean, and thank you everybody for attending. How do you assess for mites and control them within the hives?
Oh, that's a lecture in itself. But
Yeah.
basically, in a nutshell, I do what's called an alcohol wash. There are other ways to test for it. I do an alcohol wash on bees that are in the brood area. Be careful, don't kill your queen. And there are certain thresholds at certain times a year in New Jersey. We want to keep our threshold of bees. You take basically a half a cup of bees. It's 300 bees. You're going to kill 300 bees. Think of it like a blood test. You're taking blood cells out of you. You're going to kill those blood cells. 300 bees out of 50,000 is very small. So you kill those 300 bees in this alcohol, these mites come off, you count the number of mites, divide by 3, so you get your percentage per 100 bees. And it's supposed to be under 2% up through like June-ish, and under 3% into the fall. So depending if you have to treat, there are like 6 or 7 different types of treatments, depends on a lot of things. You have honey supers on the hive, that's a whole, you need to take my bee course to learn about that.
Are you going to be at the 4-H fair?
I will be at both the Warren and Hunterdon County 4-H fairs, not every day, but I'll be there at least one day at each, maybe 2 at the Hunterdon, since I'm closer to the Hunterdon. And if anybody sees me there, I'm not in the bee booth all the time because you can't keep the colony open all the time. They don't like it. You got to go in. But if you see me in there and say, hey, I saw you on the New Jersey library, can you show me some bees? I can go into the booth. So I will be at both, but not every day.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jean, and thank you everybody for attending. If anybody is interested, please consider joining Jean's class and learning more about it. Um, so just want to
Great.
tell everybody, be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.